All right, why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar for optimizing your agricultural operations with enhanced yield forecasts. My name is Will Osnato. I'm Director of Commodity Research and Analysis at Barchart. It's a huge pleasure to have Greg Crutsinger from Planet join us for the webinar today. Planet and Barchart have entered an exciting partnership. Planet, Greg's gonna go through a lot of Planet, but they're a leading provider of satellite data, and Barchart is lucky to have access to some of their data to enhance our yield models, and that's basically the agenda of what we're looking at today. I'm going to go through a quick introduction to Barchart. Greg will take you through all the exciting things that they're doing at Planet. Then we're going to get into Barchart's yield forecast model. We'll hit various topics like the input sources, the training and output, as well as some key use cases that hopefully apply to your businesses. Reminder to submit questions from the panel, and we'll get to them at the end. So let's get into it. First, a quick intro to Barchart. We've been in the business a long time, providing data and technology to folks both in agribusiness, but in the financial sector as well. We have quite a few users on our retail website, looking at stocks, options, futures, currencies, etc. Then we have our commodities solutions, which I think apply to a lot of the people on the call. Our Commodity View application and Commodity View for Excel, where you can really dig into a lot of the data we have for you, as well as exchange prices and cash bids, and that can also integrate with your workflows and risk management. And then we have some of the financial and media solutions, which is our streaming data feeds via API. So think of us embedding our data on one of your websites. One other plug, we have Barchart's annual Grain Merchandising and Technology Conference coming up in Orlando in just a few short weeks. You can use this QR code here to take $100 off registration. I'll show this again at the end, but this will be a really good opportunity to network with other folks in agribusiness, meet the team here at Barchart, and we will have somebody from Planet there as well. And just get to know people and other potential solutions for your businesses. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I think my goal here today is just to kind of do a brief overview of Planet and where agriculture fits within our business. So if you go to the next slide. So like Planet is kind of emerged out of Silicon Valley, and like all good Silicon Valley companies, we started in a garage with former NASA folks that really wanted to innovate within the space systems and move a little bit quicker compared to what governments had been doing in the past. And so that was 2010. We've come a long way since then. And let me just go over our core business, or our core mission, which is the next slide. And so Planet, our goal is really to image the whole world every single day, which we do, and we make change, global change, visible, actionable, or accessible and actionable. And so I'll talk a little bit about how the data is captured, and then really the goal of this webinar is talk about how do you take and process the imagery that we collect and make it really accessible and actionable. So I'm excited to cover that today. Here's a group of, we work across a lot of different industry verticals. Agriculture is a core vertical of Planet's, but we work with a lot of different companies. If you go to the next slide, here's a couple of the logos we work with, some of the biggest in agriculture, but we also work with smaller companies and app companies that are deriving analytics from our imagery. So I work in customer success. I support a range of different customer types. So, but particularly in agriculture, we work across the gamut of companies that are interested in how do you take imagery and derive insights and really serve that then up to the end users. If you go to the next slide, we can review our satellites. So we are a space company. I love working for a space company. It's really exciting. Sometimes when I'm so used to thinking about agriculture that if I forget that we do launch things on rockets, and so occasionally we send up satellites. This is our core satellite system, is called a Super Dove. They're a small satellite. They can fit on your desk, basically. They're about the size of kind of 2 shoe boxes stacked together. So we build dozens and dozens of these at a time at our manufacturing facility in San Francisco, and we launch them up, and we have a couple hundred in space at any given time. They're optical satellites, so if you go to the next slide, basically as they're taking images, these images collect light at different wavelengths. And I won't go too much into remote sensing science if you're not a scientist. The core part of this slide is we've had a couple of iterations of the light wavelengths that we capture, which is the bottom 3 rows, but these line up with publicly available satellites like Sentinel-2. And so you can use both our imagery and kind of interlace it with publicly available imagery as well for looking at global food production. And that's what a lot of our customers use the data. We do both the visible spectrum, but we also get into the near infrared spectrum, which is what plants care about. So we can do a lot of different derivative products that are looking at really the health and productivity of crops. If we go to the next slide, basically our satellites, we have them going towards the poles. And if you see the pink lines on the Earth, basically the satellites are acting, they're always on, they're always taking pictures, and every day they're acting as a line scanner. So as the Earth is rotating, they're capturing imagery just like a line scanner would. So you have hundreds of satellites circling the poles and then taking pictures, and then that's the way that we capture the Earth's landmass every single day. If you go to the next slide, so you can take an image every day, but what's the benefit of that for agriculture? Well, it's really looking at that kind of detailed monitoring throughout a growth season. But in particular, like, do I need an image every day? Well, you might in particular cloudy regions of the world in order to even just get a good capture in there. So you can look at change every day, but by capturing imagery at a good consistency, you're going to capture in cloudy regions. We capture at around 3.5 to 4 meters resolution. So every pixel is about 3.5 or 4 meters. You're not reading license plates on that, but you can read an agricultural field really easily and look at variability within that field. And then because we're capturing across the globe, it's really easy to scale our solutions worldwide. So I wake up early to deal with the Europeans. I deal a lot with Central South America, thinking about Brazil, and then obviously like the Midwest and the United States. So because we're capturing at a global level, we can think about the scale from the local county level all the way up to continental scales. And so that's some of the benefit of our imagery as well. We'll go to the next slide. I like to I deal a lot with pretty technical audiences, but I also don't like to forget that our imagery is actually really beautiful. And so if you go to the next 2 slides, you can just see, like, I think our imagery of agricultural fields in particular, I just like to dive into it and say, like, look, we can capture powerful data, but it is also really beautiful to look at as well, especially if you're thinking about change throughout the growing season. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we do a lot of different products. We can do individual scenes. We can stitch those together into base maps. We have other different analytic feeds as well. So there's a lot of different products that we use and derive our imagery for that take processing. You can't just take the raw imagery, you have to process it, color balance it, stitch it together, and then look at it through time if you're really interested in how well crops are performing. If you go to the next slide, we also are starting to take more derivative products that merge different satellite constellations together into more planetary insights or planetary variables that we're calling them. So Planet is going more into soil water content, land surface production, or land surface temperature, crop biomass production, other derivative products that aren't just an image, but they're actually getting closer to the insights and the answers. And so that's the direction we're headed, is more as, how do we get closer to the answer, and ultimately a dollar, which we care about on the business side of things. And then finally, we can just go through the next slide. So there's a lot of different uses of our imagery across the growing season. So if we think about the early season planning, we can think about planting as well as inputs that we're putting in and variable rate applications. During the growing season, if you go to the next build, we're thinking about crop management. So thinking about health or how well the crops are growing throughout the season. We can think about phenological models and growth models in there as well. Directed scouting, how do I manage the labor on a lot of different commercial farms. How do you send people out and prioritize different fields? If you go to the next build, we're thinking about the end of the growing season. We're thinking about harvesting and planning, and variable harvesting within fields even. And then finally, at the end of the growing season, if you go to the final build, we're thinking about how well did we do and looking at productivity analysis. So there's a lot of different analytics and stages that our different customers work on at each of those phases. But the point there is that, when you're taking high resolution, high cadence imagery and you're deriving insights, that can happen throughout the growing season within agriculture, and you can really get powerful insights and you can scale those globally. And so that's kind of why agriculture is a core focus of Planet in part of our business. So I'll hand that back. That's kind of an overview of Planet. I kind of ran through. There's a lot of PhDs and other folks that work at Planet that can get much more technical, but that's a brief overview of where agriculture fits in our business.
Thanks, Greg. That was great. And yeah, hopefully you all got a flavor for some of this great satellite imagery and how it can be used. And I want to get into the yield model overview next, and sort of how one of the main applications for some of the satellite data, and how then once we translate into a model, how you can then take that model as one of your tools and make good business decisions around that. So first, I want to take a step back though and just define a yield forecast model, and this sort of really applies to any type of model. You have a goal in what you're trying to forecast from ideally a trusted source of information. In the case of yield, we want subnational detail so that, again, that is what you are then able to forecast, is whatever your original set of data is that you're taking in. Then you need data to make predictions. So that could be the weather and satellite data that has a lot of influence over yields, which is what your target is. Then you need to select an approach to modeling. There's a lot of different ways to do models. That requires a lot of testing and research, and you sort of really need to understand what the problem you're trying to solve and what you're trying to model for to pick the right approach to it. And then you're really hoping to generate useful predictions. Predicting yield itself is not that easy. There's a lot of things that go into it, but a model can be a helpful tool. And really, again, the goal is to use the model itself to make important business decisions. The model output itself isn't an answer, it's a tool to help you make trading decisions, risk management decisions, purchasing decisions. So now let's dig into each of these topics a little more deeply. So starting with the target, government yield data in this case, I mentioned reliable data sources. There's no point in predicting something, a set of data that isn't useful or reliable. The source needs to have a good history and granularity. The granularity offers better accuracy. So if you were only, for example, given national yield, trying to predict that your model's not going to be as accurate as if when you have counties and you can learn from a lot more examples. I've listed a few sources here from the US, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina. Barchart has forecast models for each of those regions for corn and soybeans. But you can also use other targets for different use cases. One that comes up frequently is the USDA RMA data, the Risk Management Association that provides crop insurance. They have a different set of yield history from NASS. So you can build a different yield model trained to try and forecast those yields, which is something we're planning to do in the off season. That can be a better, more useful model specifically for the crop insurance industry. So again, depending on what source you're using and picking the right source is important when you're first starting your entire modeling project. Then getting a little bit more into the target, what you are trying to model in the case of yield is the deviations from trend. If you look at the chart, that's the history of US corn yields there, and that gray line down the center of it is the trend, which is just a linear regression of the history. So what you're trying to model is those red arrows, which is the difference from the trend. And essentially what you're doing is detrending that history because yield tends to grow over time, which is a result of various technological improvements and seeds and inputs and farming techniques, technology use, etc. You just have to account for that in your model when you're looking back over this history. So you take that trend out, and then you're trying to model what is essentially better or worse than expected in any given year, and that tends those deviations tend to be caused by weather, and that's what we're trying to target. Now we need data to explain those deviations from trend. This is the set of input sources that the model uses. We're getting it from satellites, ground stations, surveys. Obviously, we heard a bit about some of the planet data we have and some of those specific derived sources of land surface temperature, soil water content, vegetation optical depth, which is a growth measurement. So that's some of the data we're getting from Planet and incorporating it into our model. And then this is complemented by a variety of other sources that are all intended to measure the influence of weather on the crop or directly measure the crop growth. Measuring it directly is something like NDVI, which is, again, taking images of the plant, whereas rainfall and temperature and drought are things that influence the plant growth. And you try and put all of these together. The model then takes the latest values of all of these inputs to predict final yield during the season. Just pointing your attention to the chart and map we have here. This is an example from Planet about their land surface temperature. The example they're trying to highlight here, there was a severe heat wave and drought in Spain in 2023. That very red and bright map on the right compared to a more normal map on the left. And then when you see the line chart below it, that should give you a feel for the sort of seasonality and regularity of temperature, and how that sort of turquoise line of that heat wave is way above the 10-year range. And that should hopefully give you a sense of what some of these inputs look like and how you can measure, take pieces of them, measure them against their history, and that can be used as an indicator for what is impacting the crops. Now, feature engineering is an important next step. That is taking the raw input data and transforming it into more predictive features. My first example here is crop masking, which you can apply to satellite data. And again, the idea is to make these more predictive. So on the map on the right here, we're looking at the USDA's cropland data layer. This is something the USDA produces at the end of every season, and they convert cropland by crop type into pixels. So we're seeing the yellow dots are corn, the green dots are soybeans. So this is an extremely useful data set that they've been producing for many years. You get satellite imagers everywhere. And so if you layer them, if you use the CDL in this case to filter out all of those, filter out the satellite images on non-cropland, you can, and then aggregate them to specific counties, you've really made that satellite imagery that much more predictive by only focusing on the areas that are corn or soybeans. Now, for what we do at Barchart is we take corn and soybeans together for both of our models, because this is a backward-looking data source. So we're not trying to predict what crop rotations are. It's just if it's good, if it's been corn or soybeans in the past, it is likely to be one of those in the future and close by. And so that you're already filtering out so much non-corn and soybean area that it's particularly useful to improve accuracy. Now, other types of feature engineering could be something as simple as cumulative rainfall. We aggregate everything into 8-day intervals to line up with some of the satellite data. So think about taking rainfall total over 8 days, or an average temperature over 8 days. And then one more step would be a difference from normal of those variables, which again, just makes, you're just using that raw data and making it a little bit more useful. Now, next, once we have all of this data in place, now we need to get to the training phase, using the data to predict what happened in the past and train your model for use in the future. So this is where you can test a bunch of different algorithms which perform best. This is machine learning. You've heard that buzzword a lot of times. A lot of different things can be machine learning. Technically, linear regression is actually machine learning. The algorithm we use in all of our models is XGBoost. It's very popular in data science. Again, it's selected because it's particularly good at this type of data science problem, predicting yield from weather variables. But depending on the type of problem you're trying to solve, you can pick different algorithms. One of the benefits of XGBoost is when you have relatively limited historical period. So we only have 10 years of training period due to some of when the satellite data started. But what it is good at doing is learning from 1,500 plus counties that we're giving it, even though it's only 10 years, and using all of those counties to learn from and make better decisions, better predictions for each of them. So despite a limited history, you're getting pretty good training results. And the map we're looking at here is showing aerostats by county, with the sort of purplish bluish are more accurate, which is what you want to see. This is a sort of a common test that we do for confirming any new models, which is you want to see better accuracy in the higher producing areas, lower accuracy in sort of more fringe areas, just as a sort of common sense test. Now let's talk about the output, what it is and how you actually get access to it. So it is the models output daily yield and production forecasts. So we're taking our yield prediction, and we have a way of predicting harvested area. So it is also predicting every day a production level for corn and soybeans. And this is across all counties of major producing states across the country. So you can see some on the right. This table and chart is an example of how you would view this in our commodity view application. All this data is also accessible via our API. And those county level forecasts then easily get aggregated up to state and national levels. And this is really bringing it all together, and also seeing it across time is really important, because it's making daily forecasts. It's processing all this information from that entire set of input sources, making a big calculation, giving you a new number every day. So seeing how the path of the forecast develops over time, that's particularly important because it's going to update you as soon as possible about changing conditions, and quantifying what those changing conditions are, as opposed to just trying to interpret what the rainfall and temperature have been over the last week. This is taking a lot of different variables and giving you an actual number. And really, when there is a significant change in that daily forecast over, say, a week or 2 weeks or a month, and it's been a big change, that's when you know it's really telling you something significant has happened with all of these underlying variables, and that should hopefully lead you to make good business decisions. So let's get into a few examples of this. So I just zoomed in on that chart on the bottom. The blue line is our corn yield forecast, and then you have the red line is corn futures prices. So our forecast has been steady and high for the entire season that we've been running the model so far. And I think that corresponds quite significantly with the fact that corn futures prices have been under pressure since mid-June. They are closely related. This is the time of year when everybody's looking at yield forecasts in the US. And so that predictive nature of giving you a sense of where, quantifying where yield forecasts are well before we got the WASDE report today, which I'll get into later, that can give you some indication of general trends in futures prices. When you get into a more local level, this is really the primary use case of the model. When you get down at the national level for futures prices, and at the local regional level, since we have that county level granularity, it could be the impact on basis and cash prices in your specific regions. Now, to get into another example of that, this, I want to focus on that regional granularity. The county level granularity is perfect for giving users that local supply view and then anticipating how that will impact prices. So the map on the left is a snapshot of Barchart's cash price indexes. You may be familiar with our collection of cash grain bids. We created indexes on top of the bids at every individual facility, just to give you an aggregation up to county level. So this is a map of corn basis across the country. And you can see the significant differences in basis. The green areas are premium, high price basis. The reddish orange areas are low basis. And so let's zoom into some of those areas of high basis. This was caused by poor yields last year. And you can see the map on the right is our yield model's forecast, read as a difference from 5-year average. So the lighter gray areas are lower yields relative to average. So those same areas of high cash basis correspond with the lowest yielding areas relative to average from last season, because now we're getting almost to the end of the marketing year. Supplies are going to be the tightest ahead of harvest, and that basis has really diverged with Kansas, Nebraska, and parts of Iowa really been diverging from the Eastern Corn Belt since March. But yet our yield forecast model was telling you that back in October and November, September, October, November. So months ahead of when the basis actually started to diverge, you could have been getting a heads up from our yield model that it was a relatively poor yield year, and we're seeing now the impact on basis. Now, let's take a look on the other side. The really low basis areas correspond with some of the darker areas with yield, particularly above average yields. Indiana and Ohio, the Dakotas had quite good performance years, and those are corresponding with weaker basis now. So this really is, again, between the futures prices at the national level and these local county levels, this is the primary use case that can be applied to anybody in the agribusiness area. Obviously, it's good market information for folks in crop insurance, your crop insurance clients, or even the crop insurance for managing your own internal risks. So this regional granularity is particularly important. In the insurance sector, it can be managing cash reserves. You can overlay your exposure to risk premium by county across this whole map and have a good consolidated view of above or below average yields across your counties, or specific yield forecasts for any particular contracts that have triggers. Obviously, in the agribusiness industry, if you're trading physical grain, having some insights on the local supply, that forecast of what local supply will be, is going to be valuable. And looking at this, you can maybe even you can certainly predict how basis might react months down the line. We have a number of years of history of our yield forecast model, along with our extensive history of cash prices and basis. So you could do some quick analysis of how have yields impacted basis in the past, and give yourself sort of a range of estimates to understand risk management. So a lot of different applications for yield. And again, I had said at the top, the yield model itself is not the answer. It is helping you make better decisions. So combining that with the cash prices we have, or proprietary data you have on hand, to hopefully either save you time or save you money. Now let's take a quick look at the WASDE report. I'm sure many of you saw that earlier today. Now, one thing, of course, is the WASDE report is not giving you any county level granularity. The USDA is not even going to give you county yields this year. They may do that in the future. They may reinstate that report, but you're not going to see any county level yields from them. But the report itself today increased national yield for both corn and soybeans. So that does bring them in the direction of our yield models. You can see The map on the left is their production of the corn yields. You have quite a few states that are at record highs. Illinois in particular, 225 is quite a big number. So conditions overall quite good. So that's in line with what our model was saying. On the soybean side, they increased yields quite close to our current forecast, and you can see that state level breakdown of Barchart's forecasts against the WASDE or the USDA forecasts at this point. Now there's still some weather to come. Our model continues to run, and of course, if you're familiar at all with the USDA updates, we're going to get a series more in the next couple of months. So the model can still be, it's helpful, obviously, before you got any information from the USDA. To this point of the season, it will continue to be helpful as you get some finishing weather. Last season, there were some late heat spells and dry periods that took a little bit off the corn crop last year, certainly in particular areas. So again, that daily update you're getting for the yield models and the regional granularity can be particularly significant in applications for your businesses. And just to recap that, so accessing the data through our commodity view platform, this map on the right is an example of how you can look at it on the application. You can look at it, you can access all the data via an API. We can feed this through to your systems if you have internal dashboards or you provide information through to your either farming clients or other users. So there's a lot of different ways we can serve up the data. And again, daily updating corn and soybean yield and production forecasts, enhanced by Planet's proprietary data. That was the change we made this season, which has only made our forecast a little bit more accurate, which is really all you can hope to do is continue to improve the model with whatever you can. That's all I had for you. So again, questions, submit them via the panel on your GoToWebinar toolbar. We'll have time for a few of those right now. And again, I'll leave this up while we're collecting a few questions. Just a reminder about our annual Grain and Merchandising Conference coming up. Please sign up for that, and you'll get a chance to meet a lot of people in the industry and the folks at Barchart. And we did actually already have a question in the chat. I'll read it for everyone. So with regard to inputs, mainly fertilizers, is there a tool or model linked to Planet that can measure nutrients in the soil? That's a good question. We thought about that particularly a couple of years ago when fertilizer prices spiked and it was clear that was impacting, that could have some impacts. Fertilizer use I haven't seen anything that measures that on sort of a macro scale. You kind of need to, that's where some of the input sources that we have that are measuring the imagery of the plants themselves, the greenness, the amount of water the plant has, it should reflect good fertilizer use or farming practices, because ultimately those farming practices will show up in the health of the crop. So and mostly, so that's one way to sort of, hopefully you're capturing that. But the other reason is that there just isn't data for it. If there was really good history of data of fertilizer uses on a fairly granular level, then we would try that in the model. And that's sort of the issue with all of these modeling projects, is that you can go out and take some measurement, or you maybe have measurement on your particular farm, but if there isn't good sort of national data sets, then you can't really use them in this type of model. Hopefully that answers that question. Another question, can I schedule some one-on-one time for training on Commodity View? Absolutely, that is what I'm here for, and the support staff at Barchart, to give you, we can get really deep into the model if you want to learn more about it, but also how to get access to it. Commodity View, how to set up, I have workspaces set up to access some of that WASDE data or the yield models in particular. So I have some preset displays, and we'd be happy to show you how to navigate that, get access to that data. So again, if you're mostly been looking at prices, futures prices, or the cash bids, this data, and you're a Commodity View Pro subscriber, this data is there, and we just need to get you access to it. And we'll show you how to use it. Next question, how do you see the role of satellite data evolving in agricultural forecasting over the next few years? Greg, I might throw that to you.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of trends that we're seeing in the market. So you have a lot of satellite companies that are emerging in the startup space and launching satellites. So launching satellites has gotten much cheaper over the years if you follow the rocket industry and if you follow SpaceX. And so there's a lot of effort on, okay, we have all these data streams coming in. Ultimately, how do we merge those data sets together so that you can leverage some of the strengths of, say, optical imagery, which can look at a greenness of a plant, compared to, say, microwave data that's coming in that can penetrate the soil or the top centimeters of soil, looking at soil moisture content, for example. And so I think that what you'll see in the future is different analytics streams or different models coming out that really merge all these data sets together and get you a little bit closer to the answer of saying, like, okay, I want to subscribe to these different kind of data layers or different inputs. And that's, we're starting to see that trend already with the forecasting, with the Barchart model there. It's merging different data layers together, and you'll start to see that increasingly growing. I think that you'll also see just coverage getting better and better. So, we're daily on the optical side of things, but as you get these different data layers, you'll start to see just being able to scale globally is that much easier. And then we're seeing different kinds of satellites being launched. So Planet has a hyperspectral satellite coming out. So that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bands to get more detailed in the analytics capabilities that are there. So you're seeing different types of sensors, different cadences of collection, and then ultimately you're going to be overwhelmed with all of this data. How do you merge it, condense it down, and get reliable insights? And so you'll see that as a trend as well.
Another question, are there any specific techniques or algorithms to adjust for sudden changes or anomalies in the data, given the dynamic nature of weather and other environmental factors? So that is partly what, well, one thing is you have to have a good history of that you're trying to target, and a history of those variables that you're using as your input sources. So every year can actually be involve quite a few of these dynamic changes. If you remember last year, we had severe drought in June, followed by extraordinary rains in July. So if these histories are in your training set, then the nature of the algorithm, these machine learning algorithms that we're using, that is then going to be, that experience is learned from by the algorithm. So, weather is always pretty volatile, and the nature of the model is trying to handle those features. And I think the development of something like XGBoost and other algorithms, as they iterate themselves and come out with newer versions, it is the goal of it is to try and highlight these more anomalous events and give you better and better predictions and especially once there's more and more data in the training set, your model will be just that much better at handling those dynamic situations. All right, well, thank you all for taking the time. We appreciate your attendance. Thanks for joining. Again, follow up with us if you want to hear anything more about Barchart or Planet, and we're happy to help. So thank you again for joining, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks all.